Why is Trump obsessed with Greenland? At first glance, it sounds ridiculous, right? Icy island, sparse population, harsh terrain. But what if I told you that this isn't about Greenland per se? It's not even about the climate. And it's definitely not about China or Russia. It's all to do with America running out of options. In fact, Greenland might be one of the most important geopolitical pressure points of the next decade. Now, most people misunderstand geopolitics, right? They think it's about democracy, they think it's about human rights, they think it's about international law, it's about trade. Ideally, it should be, but it's not. Geopolitics is chess. It's cold, it's amoral, it's brutal. Every move exists because someone is cornered. Someone is shifting their alliances, someone wants someone's resources, they want to strategically control some other land. And Trump, he doesn't think like a politician. He thinks like a desperate negotiator with a shrinking balance sheet, which is what America is today, right? A shrinking balance sheet. But to understand all this, let's rewind. In 1941, during World War II, Denmark signed a wartime defense agreement with US over Greenland. It was supposed to be temporary. Why? Because there was a Nazi threat, there was a credible Soviet pressure, Arctic access mattered. But here is where it gets interesting. After World War II ends in 1951, that agreement should have been dissolved. Instead, in 1951, Denmark revised it. Now, what was allowed? The US was allowed permanent military bases, as many troops on the ground as they wanted, radar and communication systems, strategic Arctic access. And Greenland became America's unsinkable aircraft carrier. From there, the US could watch the Soviet Union, later Russia, and eventually China. And what did they want to watch? Most importantly, missile trajectories. And this was a brilliant deal, right? Because they got all the perks with no responsibility. And I'm saying this is a brilliant deal because what many people seem to miss is that Greenland was never easy to control. That terrain is so brutal that even historical empires have avoided it. The Vikings struggled, and even when Spain and Portugal were the kings of the world and had decided to divide the world into half for each, and when Portugal had gotten that Greenland in their half, they had eventually given it up. Finally, the king of Denmark only bought it under their control due to geographical parameters and considerations. But anyway, we digress. We come back to 1951 treaty. Hidden in it is a clause that most people ignore. It basically says that as long as NATO exists, US defense responsibility applies. Listen to it again. As long as NATO exists, US responsibility applies, the defense responsibility. So Greenland's security is not guaranteed by geography, it's guaranteed by NATO. And by 1951, when this treaty was revised, World War II had ended and NATO was in play, which means that the entire American ecosystem, defense ecosystem, was part of NATO. And so it was within the ambit of NATO that US was protecting Greenland and putting up military bases and troops on the ground, etc. Now ask yourself this. What happens if NATO collapses? Because from how things are going most recently, Trump has been attacking NATO itself, almost as if he wants to dismantle it. He's calling the Europeans freeloaders. He's forcing them to hike their defense spending from 2% to 5%. He's threatening withdrawal because he openly resents the idea of European countries living securely under the NATO umbrella, which is largely helmed by the US, while they contribute themselves very little. Now, is he doing it as some personal vendetta? Of course not. The uncomfortable reality is this: America is drowning in debt. Trillions are owed. There is simply no appetite left anymore to bankroll European security. And NATO is expensive. And collapsing alliances create power vacuums. Now, if NATO weakens or breaks, this treaty becomes irrelevant. US defense obligation evaporates, and Greenland becomes strategically naked. And naked territories can invite Russian probing, Chinese economic entry, corporate extraction. And then at that moment, owning Greenland outright becomes not optional but urgent, which is exactly what Trump wants. Now, this is about who controls Arctic choke points. radar dominance, and future resource corridors. And mind you, future resource corridors, that final one is very important as well. Because now let's talk about the names nobody wants to connect publicly to this whole Greenland saga. People close to Trump's ideological ecosystem: Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, but also Ronald Lauder. Across the last few years, rare earth mining, infrastructure, and Arctic adjacent companies have been quietly formed. Remember, nothing is sudden in geopolitics. No matter how sudden it might seem, there is years of planning behind it. There's years of shifting alliances that go behind a changed decision. And so now these companies stand ready to invest not just millions of dollars, but time, effort, and infrastructure to mine precious rare earth minerals. And they have been ready for years. And given the current state of US, Trump has no other option but to comply. Denmark already allowed limited rare earth access. But access is not control. Ownership is. And remember, geopolitics doesn't reward permission. It rewards possession. Yes, under the United Nations Charter, annexing Greenland is illegal on paper. But ask yourself this: who enforces international law when alliances collapse? Europe is being openly mocked as weak. The US has exited over 60 international frameworks, some that they have built themselves, some they have been an active part of. Border violations are now security narratives. And when power decides to move, charters don't stop tanks or capital flows, or rather, they can't stop. And that's the brutal truth. The real story is quite dark, like I said. America is financially cornered, banks are failing, one major bank already shut down, five seem to be on the way, social unrest is rising, bond durations are shortening from 30 years to it has come down to some few days now, which shows they can't even afford to pay the interest on it to the buyers. Precious metals are being hoarded. Companies like BlackRock are pulling out trillions from the US market. De-dollarization is in full force. So this isn't some power positioning. This is defensive positioning. And Greenland isn't expansion. It's insurance. Because when empires weaken, they grab assets. They don't look at the morality of it. So no, Trump isn't insane. This isn't an ego trip. This is a system preparing for alliances collapsing, economy going into shock, strategic retreats disguised as dominance. And here's the real question you should be asking: how far is America willing to go for Greenland? Let's pause it here for today, and I hope you join me in the next video. Remember, there is so much more going on behind the scenes, behind the headlines, and here is where we decode it. See you in the next video. Till then, namaste.